Welcome back, everybody, to another bonus episode of The Devil Within. Hope you enjoyed this new season, A Season in Hell, chronicling the murder spree of David Berkowitz in New York in the late 70s. We have a special guest with us today. Um, you probably won't actually recognize his voice because he kind of disappeared into of kind of vocal exercise of a madman. But with us is John Kioskerides. John is an actor. He's an athlete. He's a producer, podcast host, a fitness motivational YouTuber, and a writer. But to call him an actor kind of sells that short a little bit because anybody who's ever done a play and been on stage, that's a different level of acting that requires a big set of balls. And John has theater credits from East Coast to West Coast, and he most importantly, he hails from the fighting borough of Brooklyn, New York, and we're lucky to have him today. So, John Kioskerides, welcome to the show.
Man, Brandon, thank you for having me. That's a long list of. I feel humbled off of those that list you read off of, but I'm excited, man. Yeah, and you're right. Theater definitely scares the crap out of me, but I love it. It's such a clean medium of just undisturbed presence where you're just out there, and if things go wrong, you just got to figure it out. So keeps me on my toes.
Yeah, definitely. So, are you still trained? Because I know you're very committed to your craft as an actor. That you've been training for years. Is that an ongoing process?
It's always an ongoing
Mm.
process. I mean, I think the main thing that I learned as I transitioned, obviously transitioning from LA to New York, it just really taught me about choice. And that's the main thing I've always focused on. So, I mean, I'm always thinking of things, whether it be something I want to create or something I want to work on. I'm always an advocate of never, always staying hungry, and always wanting to succeed in whatever you're wanting to do as far as the next job or the next creation or the next, show. But yeah, it goes like that always. My mind's always thinking, and I think that's what keeps me on my toes.
Had you done any voice acting before this?
Before this, I had done it was like a I remember coming out of school, I went to William Esper on the East Coast, and after I finished that program, one of the actors that's my friend, he's like, "Hey, you want to do this?" And it was just a voiceover
Mm.
of like a grown man, that wasn't going to be shown, and that's the only experience I've had prior to that. So I was pretty nervous when you're like, "Hey, you want to do this?" But
Mm.
I knew the level of the project that was going to be out there, and I knew that it was going to be something meaty and something hard, and so that's why I was like, "Yes, let me go after this."
So tell me about that. When I called you up and said, "Yo, this is what I'm doing," and had you? I mean, listen, you're from New York. Obviously, you knew
Yeah.
of David Berkowitz, but like
Yep.
you're also much younger than me. Okay, and
Yeah.
I don't remember. I was 2 years old when he was doing it, so you weren't even born yet.
I didn't exist.
Right, you didn't exist. So what I'm saying, the question would be, like, from your parents or from older people in your family, did they have remembrances? Were they in Brooklyn at the time? Were they, around in the 70s then, where you had any kind of knowledge of the Son of Sam crime spree when you were growing up?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's sort of ingrained in the area I grew up in because I bounced around different parts of Brooklyn. I grew up where the Barclay Center is before that, so generally I'd hear these stories from my mom because she was a young attractive woman. She was also dating around that time, and she was what in her late teens, maybe early 20s, and so I would hear stories from her about how horrifying it was.
Is your mom
And I
Italian? Is your mom Italian?
She's full Italian. Yeah,
So
full
she had
Italian.
dark hair.
She's the quintessential target. She had
Yeah.
dark hair, brown eyes.
Mm.
And at that time when she was dating, she met my dad around I think the 70s.
Hmm.
But they were pretty terrified to go out there, and knowing my dad, he was this, tough New Yorker from Greece. And he was even scared. It was pretty crazy, actually.
Yeah, that was a lot of the sentiments that I kind of found from people who were around back then was even for like tough New Yorkers like your father.
Oh yeah.
Um, it was scared because the random nature of it and how long it lasted. 13 months. and there with no rhyme or reason. No one knew what was motivating this guy, you know? Um,
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that terrified me when I was digging into this kind of stuff, is that I was looking at what it would be like in those shoes at that time, and how would I feel? Because I mean, even researching a lot of this stuff of where he would commit these acts, I swear to you, I would go by this as an adult now, growing up in the same area, but this is like what, 20 or 25 years later, but it's the same streets and the same, overpasses looking the Verrazano Bridge and this beautiful landscape. And I'm like, every time I pass there, my mom or dad would be like, yeah, that's where the Son of Sam was.
Bath Beach out by Coney is where
Yeah.
his last thing was right there by the water.
Yeah, and Coney Island's a thing you do in the summer. I mean, it still kind of is. It's a historical landmark,
Yeah,
and my uncle would take me on the Wonder Wheel all the time and the Cyclone. It's part of that essence of that I love about Brooklyn. But yeah, you would go there all the time, and Nathan's Famous is there, and
right.
to think of these things going on at the same time is, I don't know. I'd be a horrified teenager. I probably wouldn't want to go outside, and I consider myself semi-tough, I think.
Sure, of course, but you're not tougher than a gun to your head, right?
No, I don't think anyone is,
No.
especially that type of even researching that caliber of weapon. It's so accurate, and it's so devastating,
Yeah.
that it's something that you don't want to be in the presence of at all, because your chances are very, very low.
And just the sudden explosion of violence. That's what I as a writer, um, when I was researching it before I actually got into the writing of it, I was a little concerned about the repetitive nature of the attacks and how to make that interesting or scary or new in every episode because he did the same
Mm,
thing almost every time. Walk up to a car from behind and shoot through the window. Um, and so I tried to put people in inside the car or from Berkowitz's point of view. But every time, man, it scared the shit out of me, right? Just
well,
hearing it in editing. Just you're sitting there, then there's this sudden explosion of violence and glass
yeah.
and out of nowhere, it just man, it's tough
Well,
to
I was thinking how you thought about that too, which you answered just now, but I felt the same way as the actor going into it, because I'm reading these articles and reading the specifics of how things went down, and I got chills just going through that kind of research, because it put me, especially when you're doing something for like a voice role or whatever, an acting role, you really have to put yourself in the shoes of someone, especially that's if it's biographical or whatever, but you want to get the specifics down. So it's like, how did I feel inside the car? How would I have felt if this had happened? How would I have felt if I had done this act? And that part really scared me. And you sort of have to, not judge it and just hit the off switch and then just proceed on. But getting into that mind was very, very interesting. I didn't know how I would feel with it.
well, I want to get to more of that in a second because
Yeah.
um because it was risky on my part, but not really. What I like doing with voice actors coming in on parts, I like working with people that I trust, um, so I don't have to direct them because I didn't really direct you at all on this. I
Yeah. I
think
mean, I
you did,
maybe asked for a couple of notes, but you were
yeah,
basically giving me freelance work.
because I
Just
knew
like,
that you are from the area, right? And that you'd say, "Oh, I knew motherfuckers like this," right?
oh,
Like I
totally.
knew
Yeah.
guys like Berkowitz who were a little awkward or who were a little, or from the Bronx or all that kind of shit.
100%.
There was so much meat on the bone with this guy that you could get into, and then all of that, just all of the psychosis and him, being adopted and wanting to find his real mother and the military and drug use and he's one of the guests that I interviewed referred to him as being a nest of pathology. Okay. So as an
Wow.
actor, I can imagine how interesting that must have been to jump into. But what I want you to put me in the place in the actor's headspace of being a murderer that honestly believes he's being commanded by like an evil force, right? Like, was that
Yeah,
something that you factored in? Because that's a weird place to go.
100%. I mean, when I was first starting active, I've always had a natural ability, but I never had an ingrained trained ability with a bag of tools. And so before all this, it would have been very difficult for me. But now, that I went and got the training that I needed that was safe for me, I can go into a safe headspace. So, for instance, when I was digging into something like this, I really had to go into, okay, I think the first thing I told myself was after writing everything down, I'm like, okay, here are the facts. I need to stick to the facts. And then after that, I said, okay, what impediments does this person have? And by impediment, I mean, okay, is he a sociopath? What does that mean? What are the qualities of a sociopath? Okay, does he have ADHD or whatever the case may be? But I had to get into the headspace of okay, what is this person? What mindset is he in at that point? And how can I connect myself to that mindset in some way where it's still myself, but I'm now portraying someone else?
And what did you come up with his mindset?
Well, I dug into a lot of stuff about psychology. He wasn't in the right mindset. There was stuff I read where he was on, some hallucinogens.
Mm.
Okay, so that those take different qualities on how you act and how you feel. So, for instance, that first letter, I think it was the first letter where he's kind of jumping all over the place, even how it's written down. I said, okay, this is going to be quite a challenge. But as I got into that mental state where it's like, okay, how can I connect myself to something like this? Okay, I say to myself, great. He is not in the right headspace, and maybe it's something that relates to being tired. Okay, let me see how I feel by trying that out.
Mm.
And I, video myself up and see if I like it. And then if I'm not in that same motion or in that same mind, then I can't connect to it. But I have to find something that I relate to that gets the job in.
So, a couple of questions. One, uh, what do you think his primary motivating factor was? And two, do you think that he honestly believed that he was being commanded by a demon?
That's a twofold thing. So the stuff about the demon, when I was reading it and how he was committing the acts and he was saying to himself that he was possessed, I was like, to kill someone, okay? To actually take someone's life away. And I've talked to like Marines and I've talked to people in the military and they have a one-way answer where it's if I'm being attacked forcefully, there's no other thing that I'm going to do. He's going to be taken out because
Mhm.
my life is in danger.
Right.
It's a one way of thinking. So I said, you can't really be the way he was committing those acts was very calculated. So it's to me, it's saying, was he really possessed by someone? And then I'm not a big believer in possessions and stuff. I believe in God, of course, but it's like I don't believe that somebody can physically be embodied and possessed to do an act. I feel like it has to come from a place where you kind of consciously know what you want to do, and then you just kind of either blame it on something else or you take drugs or something like that happens. And as I read afterwards, I believe it was the new articles or the new interviews he had in 1990 where he said, that was total false. I made it up.
Mm.
And so going with that piece of knowledge that I had, I would say no. But if let's say I'm now in 1970s
Mhm.
and I'm now trying to get into the mind of him, I'd be a little terrified of saying, okay, maybe he's possessed because you have movies coming out like you so vividly expressed during that time. You have
Mm.
Taxi Driver and
Mm.
The Exorcist at that time, and you start to get into the mind of like, oh, this is kind of scary. Maybe it could be real. But once the facts are laid out, I felt to myself that no, it was probably like an intent and he was either hallucinating or when you have that deep rooted, I don't know, it's like a deep rooted anger or a deep rooted self-worth that you're trying to prove. It just goes beyond your exterior. It's always going to be sitting within you.
Mhm.
For instance, it's like, who was my real father? Was he a good guy? Why did my parents split up? And I've gone through divorce as a young kid. And I think to myself, well, why did that happen? As you get older, you start to piece things together. And you're like, oh, maybe this person wasn't happy. But for him, it was very volatile. He was adopted, didn't know who his real mom or dad was, found out later on, and then found out that, one didn't want him. And that takes a real big toll, especially when you're not in the right mental state, and especially when you've just come out of the military and you're kind of failing at every life task that you're going after. It begins to be very depressing. And so the connecting factor is I really got into the mind of how someone was when they're depressed.
Mm.
And, I've been in that state of mind before. And in order to get out of it, you kind of feel like there's this black hole always hovering over you. So I said, okay, that's where the training comes in. Where I said, okay, I'm not in that headspace anymore, but let me go into that headspace again in a safe way so that I can portray this character well. So I was like, okay, depression, click that. That made sense. And I said, what else from there? Let me layer things on. Okay, how would I feel to not have a mom or not know where my mom is? How would I feel to fail at everything I've ever went after and not have a goal? How would I feel, being rejected by women constantly, or having the need to want to be with a woman and then being rejected over and over and over again? That, along with depression and along with a bad mental state, creates havoc. As we've seen.
So that's interesting that you say a lot of things there, and I'm going to do a separate episode on what I'm about to bring up because I disagree a little bit with regard to the veracity of his beliefs at the time. I
Hmm.
think my opinion of it is that because of everything that you just said, because of perhaps his drug use, because of his depression, because of his fear of abandonment again, or the uh, utter hatred of the truth of his own conception. Okay,
Mm. Yeah,
juxtaposed against his newly kind of forged uh, Christian belief structure, right? That he had adopted, he had converted to evangelical
yeah,
Christianity. Okay, which you know very much believes in the power of demons and power of possession. I'm on your side. I don't really believe in it either. Um,
yeah,
and so then, but then how do I square that with obviously his admission in the early 90s that, I made it all up? Okay. And there is a little
yeah.
bit of, there's some precedent for that. There's serial killer precedent for that. Okay. With Ted Bundy. Okay.
Sure.
Ted Bundy, uh, his youngest victim was like 12 years old, a 12-year-old girl. Okay. And he never talks about it. He never talked about it. He refused to even uh, hint at it, but it's known. Okay, all of his
Yeah.
other victims he admitted to, but that the 12-year-old victim intellectually he wouldn't allow that to tarnish his reputation. Right,
That's interesting.
that's a bridge too far for him. He goes, no, I
Mm,
don't want to be thought of as a child killer. I'll kill adults and I'll admit to it and I'll be a fucking creep about it. And
sure.
right, but he wouldn't allow anyone to ask him questions about that 12. I think she was 12. With
Do you think it was something that was motivated by ego that like messed up his ego?
Yeah, I think it was all about how he would be perceived as a
Hmm.
smart, kind of sophisticated killer. Okay. Um, how that relates to Berkowitz, and again, I'm not an expert on this at all, um, but I just find the connection interesting. Is that in jail, he had what he considers to be an actual conversion to Christianity, right? Discounting his previous conversion when in his 20s. Um, in jail, he changed his name from Son of Sam to Son of Hope,
Yeah.
and I think with that new kind of armor that he was wearing, right? That's what he was shielding himself with, and that's how he would explain, why he didn't want parole. There were a lot of people in jail that he could help. He doesn't deserve parole, but at the same time, I don't think he could bring himself to admit demonic possession because he was such a good Christian. I think that was too. It was a bridge too far for him in his conversion, his jailhouse conversion. He didn't want to admit to it.
You bring up a good point because looking at it from an outside perspective of, a writer that is creating something,
Mhm.
whether versus the actor that is, doing the task of becoming, right?
Yeah.
I feel you brought up a good point where it's like, could it possibly have been a persona? Because I'm looking at it from a perspective where I'm not going to go into it thinking that way.
Right.
But it's like, could it have been a persona for him at that time? Because it even shows that relevance in the letters when
Yeah.
he's talking about it and he wants people to be scared and he wants to be known as the son of Sam and he wants to be feared, and he wants to be hunted quite. I feel like he wanted to be hunted to the point where he was caught, and even when he was
Yeah.
caught, it was like, "All right, you got me. What
Look,
took you
there's
so
so
long?"
many
You know?
layers of this
Yeah, it's fascinating. It
in
really is fascinating.
psychosis and shit that I don't understand. It's
Yeah, and I
better
could
for
see the
me.
appeal for public too.
Sure. Look, it's better
You
for
know?
me, I think, to the
Mhm.
story. It's better for the story if he actually believed he was being spoken to by a 6,000-year-old demon was telling him to go gather the blood of the pretty girls. It's better for
Yeah.
the story. Okay.
Well, the way you tied that in was, it was quite horrifying to listen
Yeah.
to because it was in a mind where you're listening to a medium of storytelling and you're frightened. It brought me back to I always bring up The Exorcist because that's the movie that scared me as a kid.
Yeah.
They're speaking Greek in it too, and which I
Sure.
understood,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's like that's the kind of horror that I feel like is. And here's the thing about me too is that I don't necessarily like doing horror stuff because they're always so badly told.
Right.
But it's like I knew that when you brought this, to me, I knew it was going to be done well because I've looked into your writing and stuff like that over the years, of course, and I was like, I know it's going to be good, and I wasn't disappointed because this is the
Right.
kind of horror that's real and it tells you a story that happened.
Yeah. I'm constantly reminding people I'm not a journalist.
It's
But
funny because it could come off like that, but it
no,
totally doesn't though. It comes off like a show.
not a journalist. I'm a
Yeah.
storyteller. So,
Mhm.
and I didn't want to say, oh, and by the way, he recanted all the demon stuff, right? Because that would have
Yeah,
just been like
right.
wah wah, right? And I
Or he
also
woke up and it was all a dream,
right,
like, I
right,
hate that
yeah.
kinda stuff.
And I
Doesn't pay it
also
off.
because I also think that at the time, for whatever reason, and maybe he was making it up. Maybe he was making it up as a way to allow himself to continue doing it,
You nailed it, yeah. You
right?
That's exactly what I was thinking, absolutely.
Maybe, maybe. But either way, the guy was a fucking mess, and
Yeah.
and he deserves the punishment that he's getting, and I think he should have been.
I mean, I'm almost
But
fascinated because I've done work and research into like death penalty and that kind of stuff. But I mean, you start to think of is he really reformed? Does prison work? And I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question yet. Some days I'm like, maybe it's better off. Some days I'm like, no, maybe he should have, paid the price for the lives that he took. But I don't really know. It's a tough one.
I think both can be true, right?
Yeah,
I wouldn't have batted
mm,
an eye if I read everything about the son of Sam, and then I read, and 8 years later he was executed. I'd have been, yeah,
sure. Yeah,
he
it would be like, oh, cool, of
he
course, right?
deserved it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Okay. I also, honestly, looking at his interviews over the last maybe 15 years,
yeah.
I actually think that he's reformed.
It's very consistent.
It
It doesn't.
really, dude, it
Yeah,
really
and
is. It
I
really
was
is.
almost shocked because I think the first interview I saw of him was his reform, and I looked at it and I said, How am I gonna even attempt to
I
crawl into
know.
this world? This guy looks so normal now."
Remorseful,
Yeah,
completely aware of everything that he
feels
did.
like he should stay in prison. Has denied. It's
Yeah,
fascinating. That part is
I
really
did these
fascinating. So
things.
maybe it did work.
I know it's strange. It's strange because he doesn't come off as some moron. He's an intelligent guy.
Yeah,
He
very intelligent.
he
I
engages
think his
in
IQ is very high as well.
yeah, he thinks deeply about things. He obviously thought very deeply about parole and what it would mean to survivors and to him and to society as a
Mhm.
whole. Um, and he wrote a very well-reasoned letter to Governor Pataki, against
Yeah,
his own best interests.
that was wild reading that.
Man,
But I mean, you bring up a good point tying again with Ted Bundy is that, maybe he got to the point where, because I read something in the letters he wrote to his psychiatrist that they became really good friends. And I dug really deep into that. It was a lot of long, couple hundred pages, but the ones that I picked out, most that stick in my mind was what tied in with what you said is that um, he doesn't like to talk about that part of him because it's so far in his past, he doesn't know who that person is anymore.
and can't we all
You know?
relate to things like that?
That's what I think grasped me the most out of this whole thing is, yeah, I can absolutely relate to that.
100%.
You don't do the same things that you did as a young kid, and I've done some really adolescent, silly, stupid,
No, of course.
fucking things,
Of course. So
but
many,
it's like,
so much.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
To the
but
point
I
where,
think
like,
there's a choice there.
there's that Pearl Jam song, Elderly Woman Behind the Counter in a Small Town. And there's a great
It's
line in it.
one of my favorite bands of all time.
I've changed by not changing at all. Okay. Those are the people that stand out.
Yeah.
people that I haven't seen since high
Yeah.
school that are doing the exact same thing or the exact same person. I'm like, oh my gosh, what's going on? How have you not changed at all? So, yes, I can relate to an unrecognizable person from my past who happens to be me,
Hmm.
that I'm not.
I'm telling you,
Yeah.
Brandon, when I moved from LA back to New York, I had a some growing pains, okay? And the growing pains were very much along the lines of this, where I literally went back to the same neighborhood I grew up in, okay? Nothing changed, okay?
Mm,
From the people that I have known, from the um, stores or bodegas that are still there, and it's like the only unchanged place because the gentrification came into Park Slope first, then Cobble Hill where I grew up, and then after that it just kind of spread out, but it really hadn't surfaced in the Bay Ridge area. And for people that don't know, it's right by the Verrazano Bridge, okay, that connects Staten Island. But it was fascinating for me because I started to get these growing pains of like I'm not the same person, and it was really hard for me to fit in, and I never thought that would happen in the city I
mm,
grew up in.
yeah.
But after I sort of processed that over a couple of years, you start to realize, that some people just are okay with being the same, and not evolving. And for me, I knew for myself right then that it was always something of an evolution for me. I wanted to evolve. So this could be the case for him as well. Maybe it's something where in prison that's the evolution of him
Hmm.
in some way.
This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. A lot of people these days are charging into the new year, full of confidence and passion and big ideas and gym memberships and diet plans. And maybe that's you. And it's okay if it's not you. Because a lot of us are still searching for that better version of ourselves. The new year can be a difficult time. As I've said many times over the past few seasons of this show, I've been in therapy on and off for my entire adult life. And one of the main things I've learned is that massive change happens in small steps. Maybe ditch the extreme resolutions and take a small step towards a better you. BetterHelp offers online therapy. After they learn a little bit about you, you'll get matched with a licensed therapist for sessions that fit your schedule. BetterHelp is flexible, convenient, and if you're not happy with the therapist you're paired with, you can switch for no additional charge. Celebrate the progress you've already made. Visit betterhelp.com/devilwithin today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/devilwithin.
Something else I want to get into.
Yeah,
Uh, in the intro, I mentioned that you are an athlete, and I think
yeah,
people will find interesting the type of athlete you are, which is very specific. That you are a bodybuilder, a competitive bodybuilder,
I
um,
am.
and so uh, tell me about that, how you got into that, and how, if at all, it relates to uh, your acting kind of method as well.
Yeah, absolutely. As for acting, I had went
Mm.
to a conservatory called William Esper Studio, and they teach Meisner technique, and so that was a vigorous 2-year program. You can kind of get kicked out whenever they feel like you're not working in the correct way, but regardless of that, that was a foundation. Now, going to the bodybuilding, I would say it changed my life and it set the course for my life. I've always grew up with the golden age of bodybuilders. Arnold Schwarzenegger was my hero, still is. And it was something about the aesthetic that was sort of sexy, and I've always put these pictures on my wall. And I remember the first time I talked with one of my friends in Belgium. His name's Kevin. But he was like saying, oh, you might know Jean Claude Van Damme. And I kind of freaked because this guy was on my wall of a body that I wanted to have, or Arnold Schwarzenegger was on my wall as a body to have. And just that aesthetic was very appealing. And I started lifting weights to at like 17 years old because I played basketball and I wanted to get a better jump shot. And I just didn't want to be around the same friends that were doing the same stuff. They were either doing drugs in a house that I didn't want to be a part of because I'd never done anything before. And I didn't want to be, I saw the course and the trajectory of what my life would be like staying in those houses all the time. So I got into a gym, and this big Lithuanian power lifter came up to me and he goes, "No, you should compete." And I said, "What is that?" what is that? And he goes, this, you compete, you lift heavy, you should compete. And I said, okay. I started researching. I just dove into my first contest
Wow.
in 2007. And after that, I just really loved it. It bodybuilding taught me discipline, it taught me work ethic, and it taught me failure. And that's one of the biggest things that I feel like a lot of people fight with a lot. And I still fight with it too, is that the fear of failure. And so what I mean by that is you go and lift a weight and you fail on it. Big deal. What happens? If you're not going to be lifting crazy amounts of weight, you have asparagus, but it's like, what happens if you fail at something? It's not the end of the world. You take note to that, you evolve, you move on, and you change. So as I competed in more and more contests, I took a break in 2009. I won the championship for the NPC Federation for bantamweight division. And then I had to make a choice. I didn't want to go on steroids, and I didn't want to continue on a path of that because I've stayed natural my whole life. And so I took like a solid 10-year break. And the reason why I got back into it is because they brought in something called classic physique, which is a hark back to the golden era of bodybuilding. It's not mass monsters. It's not these, like I said, it's an aesthetic, sexy appeal for a body where if I have clothes on, I look, normal, hopefully semi-normal, right? But then you take your shirt off and you flex it. Where did that come from? And one of my biggest goals in life was always I wanted to become Mr. Universe and Mr. Olympia, and just like my hero, I followed in these paths. And so those inspiring, motivating factors, there always has to be a goal for me. So another thing bodybuilding taught me is a goal and how to set a goal and how to go after one, because I can't go in there and lift these heavy weights without a goal attached to it. It's
Mhm.
boring. It's not satisfying. There's nothing to achieve for. So yeah, that translates to acting, because it's like, okay, I've done that. What else can I do? How can I challenge myself? Going into theater, especially last year, you're in front of like 3,000 people, and it's like, this is one of my first biggest shows. And I'm very, very nervous. I get anxiety and I have to go through my process. But once you get out there, it's like a joy. You're just like, oh, here we go. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen. So, all those qualities were really taught by bodybuilding. And I guess the fun fact is that when you called me for this, like, yeah, I got an idea for you. And then you pitched me this idea. And I was in Romania competing for Mr. Natural Universe. so,
Oh, that's
so
great.
that was the funny thing. So yeah, I'm going to be competing again in the Natural Universe in October. So I've been kind of training for that over again, but it's a joy. I love it. And when I think this is for everything, whether it's acting, whether it's bodybuilding, or whether it's, I don't know, writing, where when you don't like it anymore and it doesn't become fun and you're not smiling, then it's time to move on.
Mhm.
And that's something that really I learned from all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it taught me discipline, especially as with scripts and stuff. You have to do a lot of research. You have to be intelligent. You have to retain information, and all that was ingrained with lifting weights.
Hmm. Taught you discipline. So was that something
Oh,
that was lacking in your life?
I would say so.
Mm,
After my parents had split, I was about 12,
mm,
and I went through this period of, you're you're in Brooklyn, and the world's your oyster now, and I didn't really have much parenting hovering over me. I mean, there of course was relatives like, oh, are you okay, are you safe? And my brother's a firefighter, so there was also that. He was always had an eye on me. But I had to sort of learn through that. And I think the morals of being in the gym, and no, I don't want to miss this workout, or no, I want to keep progressing. Hey, if I go out and have a night of drinking and I get myself wasted, okay, how's it going to affect my training the next day?
mm,
So I always thought about the consequence. So yeah, I mean, I think it wasn't necessarily a lacking of discipline, it was a lacking of direction.
mm.
And then by default, discipline came into play, because you have to be disciplined to do this kind of stuff.
Right.
And I always tell people, when a lot of people don't quite understand, but it's either I'm 100 or nothing, with anything I do. If I'm called on for a project, or if I'm interested in something, if I want to attain something, if I want to go for a championship, I can't be 50% in and 50% out. It has to be 100 or nothing,
Yeah.
because you're not devoting all your time. And then what's really the point of doing that? So yeah, I mean, the foundations were definitely drawn from that, from the time of being in the gym, because you have failure on a daily basis, and in order to see progress, you need the discipline. And so that translated to acting, of course, because it is vigorous. And if you want to be, you know, really, really great at something, not just to do it just to say you do it, but to be really great at something and successful at something, I feel like you have to have that discipline, because without it, you're all over the place. There's nothing that's giving you direction to go forward. You're going askew all the time.
What made you say no to steroids with your heroes being people who built their
Yeah,
bodies on it?
yeah, absolutely. I think, well, there's two parts to that. One part was I was terrified. Okay,
Of what?
of any side effect.
Like your
You
ball
know,
shrinking, like that kind of stuff?
yeah,
Right,
even stuff like that, like your ball shrinking, or
right.
like your liver being double the size and it's irreversible. I've trained with guys that were on
Yeah,
steroids my whole life.
yeah.
Okay, and I think firsthand I saw, these 17, 18-year-old kids, massive guys. And I kid you not, I was training with a really good buddy of mine. And about a year later, we were still training together. And he comes into the gym and he's like laughing, but he goes, "Hey, check this out. I have this really, really cool thing." And he shows me, not even kidding, a blood pack attached to his chest that's draining blood because he had a hematoma explosion from the side effect of steroids.
Wow.
And I said to myself, isn't bodybuilding about, supposed to be about being in the best health and shape of your life?
Yeah,
Where did that go astray here? It's because it sells.
right,
And that's the thing. These things sell. And so I said, I didn't want to be part of that market machine. I wanted to do it for myself. And myself is, it's being in the best fitness shape, in the best health of your life.
right.
I think that's why the drugs had scared me, my whole life.
Yeah.
Is that I was just afraid to tamper with that. Plus, my dad would have given me a beating. That's for that's
Good
for
for him.
sure. But yeah, I think it was, one thing was terror, and the other part was I didn't want to be a hypocrite.
Yeah,
I'm pretty straight edge when it comes to my life and my decisions and talking to people. And I've always wanted to be consistent with that. I didn't want to be something that was for show or for fake. And of course, listen, we all do it. If I'm on the stage, it's showmanship. When I'm performing in theater, it's showmanship. But when it comes to being a human being, I wanted to be consistent with my morals. And that really was the thing that made me stick to saying I don't want to do this, is the morals and the fear.
good for you. Whatever gets you there, right?
Yeah,
Fear,
exactly. Yeah,
fear,
yeah.
fear's a strong motivating factor sometimes.
It is,
Yeah.
especially if something scares the shit out of you. You're like, I don't want to. I'd rather not go near it.
I could argue that it's a more powerful deterrent than a moral compass sometimes, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
maybe. All right, rapid fire. Ready? Best pizza.
Oh my god,
Don't think
Def-
about it. Just fucking answer.
DeFara's Pizza.
Where?
It was on East 18th and Avenue J. It's closed down now, unfortunately.
Oh, okay. Well,
Yep.
all right. If you had to get it, if you're all right in New York, any borough today, pizza, where would you go?
I'm gonna be biased. It's Brooklyn.
Okay. All right. Great. All right. Marvel or DC?
Oh, totally Marvel.
Okay. Cats or dogs?
Dogs.
De Niro or Pacino?
Oh, Pacino.
Whoa!
Yeah, I know.
Hey.
They're both the people why I wanted to get into acting. Both of those guys do.
Whoa!
But
Breaking
it's
news.
just, yeah, The Godfather is my number one favorite film of
All
all
right, that's
time.
next. Godfather or Goodfellas?
Yeah,
Godfather.
Godfather. And I
Wow.
love Goodfellas.
Same. Okay. I think I learned more about you in those questions than anything else. All right.
I also love Rocky and Jaws. I put those up there too. Shawshank Redemption, another one.
Sure. Yeah.
Classic.
Those are all. I mean, every movie that you just mentioned, I won't ever turn off, no matter what I'm doing.
For me, it's on. I'm there watching it.
I'll just stop what I'm doing and watch to the end of anything. Yeah, of anything. Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
All right. So listen, Johnny, this has been awesome. I want you to
this has
tell
been
listeners
fantastic, man. I love this.
tell listeners where they can find you.
Yes, you can find me on my website. It's Johnny Kios, JOHNNYKIOS.com, or just, you can find me on Instagram. It's John underscore Kioskerides, KIOSKERIDES. It's a Greek mouthful. but but that's where you could find me. And I always respond to people because I like to be engaged.
Great. And anything coming up? You said you're going to be competing again soon in October?
Yeah, so I'm right now tied to two theater shows in the DC area, so you could look out for that. It's probably going to be from April onwards to about June. And then
Okay.
I have Mr. Universe in October, Mr. Natural Universe, and then I have Mr. Natural Olympia in Vegas in November. So if you're around, you can come see some cool stuff.
I'm going to be in Vegas in March to see Springsteen, but
Oh, oh my God, that guy just kills my heart,
yeah,
man.
right.
I'm always listening to him.
Well, I can say from experience that if you haven't been to a bodybuilding competition, one, you should go.
It's so much fun.
For the holy shit factor of it, right? Because you really don't know what you're into. You've seen
You
pictures,
have
you've seen
no
whatever.
idea until you
You
actually see it
you
happening.
don't know how much of how performative of an art it is.
Yeah.
That scared me, and shocked me. And I went, this is really hard.
Did
It's
you feel inspired afterwards?
I felt
Or like defeated?
no, not defeated. It's weird what I felt.
Okay, good,
I
good.
was actually I was just really, really surprised. I was like,
Yeah.
I had no idea how dedicated you had to be as a performer to get through this. The level of confidence required is through the fucking roof. Okay. And the care and the craftsmanship that the athletes take with their own bodies as their canvas
Mm.
is I'm telling you, it's breathtaking. Like, I can't believe people are able to do this to themselves.
Well, the
You
funny
know?
thing I will say is that, I'm very like shy as a person. Okay. And you talk to my acting coach, she's like, fucking shy, Johnny. What are you talking about?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But it's like, there's this inner part of me where I do fear going out on stage and stuff. But it's the work that you've already done where you're just like, you know, this is it. Enjoy this moment. It's like being on a set. You've done the work already. There's not really much you're going to alter without obviously direction from your director. But it's like, this is the point. This is the time to have fun.
Yeah, but here's the
That's how I
difference.
look at it.
Here's the difference. Ready?
Yeah,
99.9% of the time you walk out onto a set, you're not 99.9% fucking naked,
naked.
right? Okay?
Or in a little tiny Speedo
A
trunks.
little
It's the,
speedo,
it's
right?
the,
And you're
yeah.
oiled up and you're like completely saying, "Here I am naked, judge me."
Yeah.
Like, that's
Plus,
what
backstage, it
yeah,
feels like a conversation is as normal as this. You're having like a cup of coffee, talking over topics, and everyone's like either naked or half naked.
and
It's
getting
it's
oiled up by another
yeah, it's
person.
it's amazing. I was being oiled up for one of the shows, and I had the team grease coach there, and he was like, just having a conversation with me. He goes, "Yeah, how you feeling today?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm feeling pretty good." And I'm like, "Can you bend down real quick?" "Oh, okay, no problem. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what did you do last night?"
Yeah, I no, I'm telling
It's
you,
awesome.
it's just
I love it.
it's a world that that not a lot of people know exist, or if they know it exists, they don't really know the particulars, and it's worth investigating because
I
it
love
was
that. Yeah,
fascinating, fascinating.
I wholeheartedly agree with that.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure that people can understand that you can do it if you want to. It's not something unattainable. Oh, thank you, thank you. Oh man. Yeah, come visit. Come visit a show, and I'll add on to that. Brandon, this has been a joy to work with you. The project that you've created has been really fantastic. It's another thing to be part of a good role, but it's another thing to be part of good writing, and that's the main thing that I always look for. And once you have that, it's just golden, man. So thank you. Man, I appreciate you, brother.